Welcome to IVF This, episode 165, IVF and Self Regulation. Hello, 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 my beautiful friends. I hope you're all doing so well today. After a long kind of summer break where I took from taking a lot of new clients on, I just want to let you guys know that starting in about 2 weeks from when this episode drops, so the 1st of September, my calendar is going to be opening up again. I'm going to have a lot more opportunities for new client consultations, or what I call the Take Back Your Life call, which is a full hour with me where we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. We can do coaching. I can answer questions. We can see what it would actually be like to work together. It's a free kind of gift that I offer to everyone. So there's going to be a lot of openings coming up for September. So be on the lookout for that. If you've been like a long time listener, but you have kind of always in the background been interested to know what it would be like to talk to me, be coached by me, this is a perfect opportunity. Zero risk. I assume nothing in those meetings. If you enjoy what we're doing, we can absolutely talk about what it would be like to work together. If you know that that's just not something that you have the bandwidth for, but you still need a little bit of support, book it anyway. I promise you. I always want you to get what you come for, whether we end up working together long-term or not. So please, if you've been on the fence about it, go ahead and schedule your Take Back Your Life call. You can do that on my website, www.ivfthiscoaching.com, or you can do it on either my Instagram or Facebook. My link's in those bios. All right, so let's get to a topic today called self-regulation. I've alluded to this topic, but I've never tackled it head on. I think that's kind of been the theme for the last, 15 or 20 episodes. We're starting to get a little bit deeper into the weeds. The last couple of episodes have been really kind of drilling down into the specific things that I talk about, like setting realistic expectations, emotional tolerance. The window of tolerance was the previous week. All of those are fantastic tools, and they continue to build on each other. And that's what also this episode is going to be on self-regulation. What exactly is self-regulation? Well, self-regulation is about controlling your emotions, behaviors, and thoughts, right? So a quick breakdown. There's emotional regulation, which I think most of us think of when we think of getting regulated or being dysregulated. But that's managing your feelings and reacting appropriately, how you want to react. Okay. Then there's behavioral regulation, which is keeping your impulses in check and staying disciplined, which I think a lot of us want to do, but I don't think we would think of it technically in that self-regulation bucket. And then there's cognitive regulation, which is keeping your attention and kind of processing information efficiently, not going down the spirals or the death loops that we can go down, right? That's the form of cognitive regulation. So think about staying calm during like a stressful meeting, or resisting the urge to procrastinate, or keeping your focus on a super challenging task, even when you've got some stressful things going on in the back of your mind. That's self-regulation in action for all three areas. All right. On a nervous system level, which is where regulation is, right? It's all in your central nervous system. To be regulated means that you're able to notice states of dysregulation, which we will cover, and the ability to return yourself to a more balanced or regulated place, which we will also cover. So understanding self-regulation, first and foremost, requires that you take a look at your body's nervous system, which plays the most crucial role in managing our responses to stress and emotional triggers. Here's how the central nervous system is connected to self-regulation. It's going to be a lot of information. That's okay. I'm not expecting anyone to take notes. There is no test you have to pass, but I think a broad overview of what your central nervous system is doing and why is really important to understanding and being able to self-regulate. All right. So the autonomic nervous system, the ANS, is part of your peripheral nervous system that controls like your involuntary bodily functions: heartbeat, digestion, breathing, blinking. The autonomic nervous system is divided into two branches: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. I promise this is really important. Broad strokes, nobody's going to make you pass a biology test right now, okay? Your sympathetic nervous system, which is often referred to as the fight or flight system, right? That prepares your body to respond to perceived threat. When activated, right, it increases your heart rate, it releases adrenaline, and it boosts blood flow to your muscles. This response is essential for survival, but can be counterproductive when triggered by non-threatening everyday stressors. And I talk about this all the time. Your brain cannot differentiate between someone behind you chasing you up a dark alley and you sitting on your couch thinking about what happens if I never get pregnant, right? It is going to interpret it all the same as a threat. When you're dysregulated, the sympathetic nervous system might be in overdrive, causing symptoms like rapid heartbeat, sweating, and heightened anxiety. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, is known as your rest and digest system. It helps the body to return to a state of calm after the threat has passed. It slows your heart rate, it promotes digestion and conserves energy. It is crucial for recovery and relaxation. Effective self regulation often involves activating your parasympathetic nervous system to counterbalance the sympathetic nervous system, helping to calm your brain and your body. The vagus nerve, which is a nerve system that it kind of travels all the way through your body. It's vague, the term vague because it winds through your body. It's really interesting. Is a crucial part of the parasympathetic nervous system. You have to understand the vagus nerve to understand how to activate your parasympathetic to get to that rest and digest, that calm recovery after a threat. And it plays a significant role in regulating your body's stress response. So it runs from the brainstem through the back down through the abdomen, influencing the heart, lungs, the digestive tract, right? So when you can activate and flex like that vagus nerve, we call it vagal tone. Vagal tone is associated with a greater ability to relax and recover from stress. It's linked to improved emotional regulation, social connection, and just overall well-being. Practices that stimulate the vagus nerve, and it's going to be very similar to what I talk about when I talk about how to regulate yourself. Deep breathing, meditation, humming, singing, dancing, all can enhance vagal tone and promote a sense of calm. Don't worry about taking that list down right now. I'm going to cover it again towards the end of the episode. So, okay. So our stress response as it relates to regulation, when we're faced with stress, our body undergoes a series of rapid, and when I say rapid, I mean rapid physiological changes designed to like prepare us for action. When these stress responses are beneficial, are in short bursts. They're not meant to be chronic over time. In fact, chronic activation can actually lead to health issues and emotional dysregulation. There's actually research over the last 10 to 15 years that talk about chronic activation of your sympathetic nervous system have been linked to a lot of autoimmune illnesses, particularly in women, right? So that's a whole other field of research. I could talk about that in another episode sometime, but they are all linked, right? We're not supposed to be chronically activated. Our sympathetic nervous system is not supposed to be on chronically, fueling our body with these hormones, this activation, things like that. But because of the way our brain doesn't process the difference between a physical threat and a mental or emotional threat, we live in a very stressful society. It's very difficult for our brain to understand, hey, no one's actually trying to kill me. I'm just sitting in my chair in my office thinking about this report that I don't want to write or whatever. And it's activating, right? Self-regulation means that you have the flexibility and the resilience to move between these states while knowing internally that you can anchor back into that more regulated place where you can feel present and grounded. I think most of us think of regulation as that like emotional regulation piece, but it can be any one of the three combination between the emotional, behavioral, and cognitive, because any one of those can activate your sympathetic nervous system. And that's when I talk about staying focused on the things that you can control, I remind you that the only three things you can control is how you think, how you feel, and what you do. And they're all tied together. Okay. So we have these three areas. We know the emotional, behavioral, and cognitive regulation. So what does dysregulation look like, right? So recognizing when you are dysregulated is one of the first steps to managing it, right? I always say we can't fix or we can't work on what we don't see. So we have to be able to see it first. We have to create that awareness. And that's something that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. Again, I will not leave you hanging on just this information. I will give you actionable steps on how to get yourself more regulated. But some physical symptoms would include increased heart rate or palpitations, muscle tension or tightness. That's a big one for me. If you're watching me on video, my shoulders, I will wear my shoulders as earrings when I'm dysregulated. And I can sense it because my trapezius muscles will be very, very tight, like concrete tight, because that's where I hold a lot of my stress. There's stomach issues like nausea, butterflies, things like that, sweating or feeling hot, shallow or rapid breathing. Okay. Emotional signs can be feeling overwhelmed or out of control, a heightened sense of anxiety or panic, sudden bursts of anger or irritability. You've heard me talk about that's a struggle of mine, being emotionally reactive. I tend to do that in forms of being angry or irritable. Feeling unusually sad or depressed, or experience a sense of dread for no reason that you can see or kind of think about, identify in that moment. Some behavioral indicators can include difficulty concentrating or staying focused, acting impulsively or making hasty decisions, withdrawing from social interaction, social activities, overreacting to minor inconveniences. That one hits a little close to home for me. And engaging in unhealthy coping mechanisms like overeating or substance abuse, things like that. Cognitive indicators can be racing thoughts or an inability to quiet your mind, catastrophizing or imagining worst case scenarios, negative self talk or self criticism, difficulty making decisions or feeling indecisive, or even feeling like the decision that you make has to be the absolute right decision and it has like the weight of the world on it, right? That's part of all of that. Memory problems or forgetting important details. Um, those are all cognitive clues. And what I will say, if you have some sort of form of neurodivergency, I do myself, those are going to feel like that's just like commonplace. Like you're going to be like, well, that's a regular Tuesday for me, Emily. Thanks so much. But that's an important clue because of that neurodivergency, we are much more prone to dysregulation, right? If on a scale of 1 to 10, if a neurotypical is dysregulated, let's say a 4 out of 10 on a regular basis, like just going through their everyday lives, a neurodivergent is probably closer to an 8 or 9, nearly always dysregulated. Okay, so if there were a lot of points on that list that I just gave you hit home and you're neurodivergent, that's why. That's why. You're just kind of more likely to be in a chronic state of dysregulation. So we just have to focus a little bit more on how we can re-regulate ourselves. So that's a little bit of a caveat. There are also social or relational signs of being dysregulated: conflicts with family, friends, or colleagues, feeling misunderstood or really overly sensitive to criticism, difficulty expressing yourself clearly. That can be a big one. Avoiding social situations or interactions. That is a huge one for us going through infertility and IVF, right? And I don't think we often think about that from like the dysregulated lens, but that is a sign of dysregulation because you don't want to put yourself into a situation where you would become more dysregulated, right? If you're like diet dysregulated and you feel uncomfortable and you don't want to go out, and so you kind of isolate yourself because the idea is like, well, I already feel uncomfortable. I don't want to feel more uncomfortable. That's the reason. And then, of course, feeling disconnected or isolated from others, which feeds into that avoiding social interactions. So, an interesting thing, or at least I find it interesting, about dysregulation is when we are dysregulated, and I talked about this a little bit earlier in the episode. When we're stressed, our body, our brain will shut down important parts of our body because it's trying to streamline our body's fight or flight response, right? Remember, it can't differentiate between threats, physical immediate threats, and emotional or psychological, like thoughts that you're having, emotions that you're experiencing. All the same, full on red alert, danger, right? And the brain isn't a slouch. It's going to turn off really important things like the immune function, your digestive system, reproductive system, hormone regulation, logical thinking and decision making. But the thing is again, the brain is only supposed to do that for short periods of time. It is not meant to be in a chronic state of dysregulation. It's good for no one. No one. All that to say, if you feel like you're in a state of kind of chronic dysregulation, that doesn't mean that you have caused your infertility. It doesn't mean that you have prevented yourself from getting pregnant or preventing, assistive reproductive technology from working for you. It doesn't mean if you have some sort of like autoimmune disorder, it doesn't mean you caused that, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about blame. We're talking about awareness. You're not allowed to use the information that I give you which is intended to create awareness. You're not allowed to use that against yourself. Okay. It's the first rule of Thought Fight Club. I got to think of a better name for that. Okay. So understanding why self-regulation is important is because life is always going to like throw you off balance. There is not going to be a moment in time where you can like take a breath and think, oh, this is how it's going to be forever. Like I've gotten through all of the hurdles. Life has no more surprises for me. That's just not going to happen. Not ever going to happen. Right. So I remember I was watching, I think it was like a TikTok or maybe a reel about, it was a coach giving a basketball team kind of a pep talk. And unfortunately, I don't remember the coach and I don't remember the team, but I remember the coach saying, you don't need to wait for life to get easier. It will never get easier. It will change, it will develop, it'll be different kinds of hard, but it's never going to get easier. What you want to do is get better at managing the hard. And that is the cornerstone of self-regulation. Learning how to manage the hard parts of life. Better is a tough word, but more efficiently, more effectively to promote that sense of calm and groundedness. And I mean, let's be honest, that is what we talk about on this podcast within the context of infertility and IVF. To be self-regulated means you have the ability to regulate your own nervous system in response to internal and external circumstances, right? Whether it's something that's going on in your brain, you're doing this, right? You're catastrophizing or whatever, or there's something going on outside of you that is causing this turmoil. Self-regulation is a skill like any other skill. It takes time, intention, practice to cultivate. Not impossible, but when we can do this, it will make life just a little bit easier. It will be a little bit easier to manage. Relationships will be smoother. Work will feel easier. Depression and anxiety are much less likely to interfere with your daily life. Okay. So how is the big question? All right. Dr. Bruce Perry coined the 3 R's for regulation. The first one is regulate. I'm going to give you specific examples below. Then relate, and finally reason. So we're going to use those 3 R's as the framework for how we're going to re-regulate ourselves. Okay. So first we got to cover regulate. We cannot, when we talk about relate and reason, the 2 and 3rd R, those are cognitive processes. When you are dysregulated, it's really challenging to regulate yourself cognitively. It's not impossible, and I'm going to give you a couple examples of how to do that cognitively, but you have to deal with the emotion first, whether that's cognitively or from like a body perspective. You have to do that first before you can do relate and reason. And it'll make sense once we go through all the 3 R's why that's the case. So when we talk about the 2 main ways to regulate ourselves, we talk about it from top down, which is using your mind, your brain to control the signals that are going on in your body, or bottom up, which is using your body to control the signals that are telling you you are in danger. Okay. So the top down approach, I personally, in my experience, have not found this to be as effective as the bottom up approach, but it is certainly effective, and it's effective for many people. And there's actually a lot of great research around what I'm going to explain to you. Personally, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the bottom up approach, but these are really important topics too. Okay. So the goal is with the top down approach is to occupy your prefrontal cortex, right? that thing that didn't finish developing until you were 25, which is why we spend most of our young life completely dysregulated, right? That prefrontal cortex, you want to occupy it with something that is stimulating enough that you can't really do anything else. So things that require a lot of your attention. Examples would be like gardening, art, crochet, or other thread work, right? Cross stitching, things like that. There have been a lot of studies in neurobiology and neuropsychology that talk about the game Tetris as a mechanism for self-regulation. I know it sounds strange, but if you think about it, you have to focus on Tetris. Otherwise, the blocks are just going to keep building up. And it's not just Tetris. Other games like Words with Friends or Wordle, things that require your complete attention. It's just that Tetris is the one that has been studied the most. I think someone even said Pac-Man one time, but it's a game that requires your focus. It doesn't even have to be on if you're trying to take a screen break or something, get a deck of cards and play solitaire on your with the actual physical cards instead of playing on your phone. That's a great alternative. Really, anything that requires a high degree of concentration will have a positive impact on your brain and your body when you're dysregulated. Now, I can already feel some of the questions coming in, right? But Emily, what if the thing that requires a high degree of concentration is the thing that's dysregulating me, right? Like a school or work project or something like that. That is where the bottom up approach is going to be very effective. So I'm going to share a few techniques related to the bottom up approach. I do have a video recording of this episode on my YouTube channel. So if I'm explaining something, but you need a visual, go ahead and check the YouTube channel. And that was also a shameless plug to say, hey, I have a YouTube channel you should check out. Okay, so bilateral stimulation. So one of the first ones is the butterfly technique. So you put your hands towards your chest, the palm of your hands towards your chest, link your thumbs, and then put a light pressure back and forth across your chest. That is the butterfly technique, right? And it's the bilateral stimulation that's going to help you. Sometimes if you have maybe a little bit more dysregulation and you need a little bit more pressure, this is going to sound really strange as you're listening to it on the podcast. Again, go to my YouTube channel to see this. But taking your fist and with more pressure, you're not trying to bruise yourself or injure yourself, but with more pressure, you're going to bang on your chest in that same bilateral mechanism. And you can even like, I know that sounds strange, but it's all because that is involving breath work as you're pushing breath out as you're doing the bilateral stimulation. Okay. I actually used to do this in my car when I worked at the hospital several years ago. When I worked in hospitals, I should say, I worked in more than one. But if it was a particularly challenging day or like with work, it was really hectic, or if it was a very emotionally heavy experience, I would be pounding my chest trying to get myself regulated again before I went into the next patient's room. Okay. And then deep diaphragmatic breathing. So my favorite diaphragmatic breathing technique, and you can Google all of them, you can Pinterest them, ask ChatGPT. There are a lot of different ways to do it. My favorite is you take a really big deep breath in, and right at the top where you think you have all of the breath in, you take one more big sweeping breath in. And you do the same as you exhale. So you exhale kind of slowly. And when you get to the end, you don't think you have any more air left. You do a really big push and get that last remaining bit of air out. And that's going to release your diaphragm, which again is part of that vagus nerve. It's going to do that stimulation. That's what you want. Okay. You can do that 5, 6, 7 times, and it really, really will help you get regulated. One of the biggest physical symptoms of dysregulation is shallow, fast breathing. One of the fastest ways to regulate yourself is to do slow, intentional breathing, right? That is literally telling your body, I'm not in danger because I can take long, deep, slow breaths. So clearly I'm not in danger. So your brain's like, oh, okay, maybe we can chill out just a little bit. Some other examples that don't involve like beating yourself, would be lo-fi music. I think it's called low fidelity music. I think that's what the lo-fi stands for. But Spotify has some great playlists. I actually listen to it when I'm writing because there's no words, so I don't get distracted. Also, bilateral stimulation music. Is also their playlist also on Spotify. That one's a little bit trickier than me, but the bilateral portion is just as effective. It's tricky for me because my eyes kind of want to follow the sound because you get sound in one ear and in the other, so my eyes go back and forth. But it's still a great mechanism for that. A couple of more physical exercise. You knew I was not going to be able to talk about it without. I was not going to skip that one. High impact or low impact. You get the endorphins either way. It helps with regulation. Singing, dancing, humming, excellent ways to help you with regulation. The second R is relate. And that's true whether that's dysregulating, you're dysregulated or someone else is dysregulated. Remember, we have to start with getting regulated first, and then we can move to relate. Once regulated, we can turn to relate, which for self-regulation is going to look a lot like compassion. It's going to look a lot like self-acceptance. Okay. It's going to sound like, man, I am really struggling right now. That was hard. This is hard. I'm nervous. You're going to be naming and labeling the emotions that you're experiencing. This would be hard for anyone in my situation. Anyone who's going through what I'm going through would probably think this way or act this way or XYZ, right? What I am feeling and experiencing is understandable and valid. That's how you can relate to yourself, right? The same way that you would relate to a friend that you're talking to, like, oh, yeah, I've gone through that before. Oh, yeah, that makes complete sense. You're just doing that for yourself, right? Once you're regulated, you can get access to that cognitive portion, but that's how you can relate to yourself. And the third R is reason. And that is the opportunity to reflect, learn, remember, communicate, and repair after you are regulated and once you have related to yourself. They have to be in that order, otherwise it's not going to work, or it's not going to be, I guess, as effective. It might still work, but it's certainly not going to be as effective as if you go in that 1, 2, 3 kind of pattern. If you yelled at your best friend or your partner when you were dysregulated, focus on repair. I was really dysregulated, or however you want to say it, right? If that's not part of your kind of verbiage, if that's not part of your language, that's okay. But something to that effect, right? I was really dysregulated, and I then described the action that you took or didn't take, and I'm sorry, right? We're just taking accountability. We're right. Like, so the other night I snapped at my husband. I was like, I think I was changing out the cat boxes or something. And he was laying on the couch because he didn't feel well. And I was getting frustrated because I had a lot of stuff to do. And the way that I said something was completely bitchy. I don't even remember what I said, but I remember like I walked into the room after saying it. The words just escaped my lips. And I turned back around and I was like, that came out a lot bitchier than I intended to. I'm sorry. I have like a Rolodex of things going on in my head. You are allowed to rest. I apologize, right? You're just taking accountability for your behavior so that you can reason yourself out of it, right? So another example could be you went straight into work after a really tricky blood draw at the clinic, and you didn't take your time to regulate yourself. And now maybe your work is sloppy or you aren't able to focus. Reasoning would say, after my next appointment, I'm going to do XYZ. I'm going to sing/scream in the car on my way to work to let out all my anxiety so that I'll be ready to focus as much as I can when I get to work. Something like that, right? You're trying to learn from being in that place of dysregulation how to make sure that you stay regulated a little bit longer, a little bit more effectively. It's not going to be perfect. Do not expect yourself to be regulated 100% of the time. I would actually say try to go for about 50% of the time, right? If you're someone like me who's neurodivergent, 50% of the time might not be a realistic thing, right? Especially if you're not medicated. 25% of the time, right? We just want to learn. We just want to learn about ourselves more. And that's the whole idea about this. So if you reacted to someone or something when you're dysregulated, you're not a monster. You're not a horrible person. You're a person going through a hard time, and that's different. So the reasoning step is not an excuse to beat the crap out of yourself. It's an opportunity for accountability and reparation, okay, with yourself and with others. it's possible to do that when you do that second step of relating after you've regulated yourself. When you extend that compassion to yourself after you have regulated yourself, you are much more likely to be able to access the reasoning part and reflect and learn. And we're just learning how to take care of ourselves. That's the whole, that's the too long didn't listen. We are learning how to take care of ourselves when we do these things, because nobody really teaches us how to do that. But I mean, stick with me, hang out with me, and I can help you with that. Okay? So that is what I have for you today, friends. I hope you have a great week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.